A stone door rolled shut from the inside in a Sumerian city that was never supposed to have one. Lagash, 4,000 years ago, sealed by the people it was built to protect from something the scribe could only describe as alive. Here's what you'll leave with: a tablet ignored in a Baghdad basement for half a century that doesn't describe a flood or a war or a god's punishment. It describes a planned evacuation of 90,000 human beings into pre-stocked underground chambers. And the part 4 scholars argue about behind closed doors isn't what came down from the sky. It's who built the shelter that was already waiting. Quick question before we go further. If you had 72 hours to move 90,000 people underground, what's the first thing you'd stockpile? Hold that answer in your head, because the Lagash Council's choice and the quantity they chose tells you something uncomfortable about how long they'd been preparing. Picture a wooden crate in a flooded basement in Baghdad, stenciled Tel Al-Hiba 1968 season, unclassified material. It survived 3 wars, the 2003 looting, and the 2015 flood of the museum's lower levels. Nobody opened it for 53 years. When the Iraqi-Italian conservation team finally pried it open in November 2021, they expected what the label promised: leftovers. 10 of the 11 tablets inside delivered exactly that: grain receipts, labor rosters, temple supply manifests. The administrative bones of a Sumerian city, the kind of material that fills museum drawers and academic footnotes. The 11th tablet was larger, thicker, 3 columns of dense cuneiform on both faces. When conservator Marco de Gregorio lifted the salt crust off the obverse, the first column wasn't accounting, it was a narrative. And the verb in line 3 was uji shushi, the bureaucratic Sumerian term for relocating a population. If you've ever found a sealed box in your grandparents' attic that turned out to hold something the family had agreed to forget, you understand the shape of what happened next. Epigraphist Ali al-Hashimi got the photographs that same evening. 3 days later, he called the team lead and said his transliteration had to be wrong, because the number didn't make sense for a city the size of Lagash. The number was 25 shar. Sumerians counted in base 60. 1 shar equals 3,600. 25 shar is 90,000. 90,000 people moved below the surface by administrative decree. For context, the entire estimated population of Lagash and its hinterland at its 3rd millennium peak sits between 80,000 and 100,000. The tablet isn't describing a partial evacuation of a district, it's describing the relocation of everyone. Households counted, families grouped, each group assigned to a numbered entrance. The text calls this phase shudu, literally, the count of hands. That's a census, a real one, with quotas and assignments and a chain of command. The kind of document that survives in modern emergency management archives. Not the kind of thing a Bronze Age myth invents on accident. Contrast 2 scenarios. In the first, a city hears that something terrible is coming and digs frantically. Improvised pits, hand-cut shafts, panicked families hauling whatever they can carry. In the second, the warning arrives and the council pulls a pre-existing plan off the shelf, assigns each family to a numbered door, and moves grain that was already stockpiled into chambers that were already provisioned. The Lagash tablet describes the second scenario: 17 sealed entrances across the region. Stone doors engineered to roll from the inside. Narua Igal, the great stone mouth. 14 gur of barley per household, 1 gur equaling roughly 300 liters. That's 7.5 million liters of grain, pre-stocked, enough to feed the population for a year. You don't quarry stone doors and stockpile a year of barley in 72 hours. The infrastructure existed before the threat arrived, which means somebody, at some earlier point, decided this kind of event was likely enough to justify the cost of building for it. That's the question the radiation interpretation skips right past. Insight worth sitting with. The single most contested word on the tablet isn't Namtag, the word for affliction. It's the tiny determinative stuck in front of it. Sumerian scribes used determinatives, small signs that classified what kind of thing a word referred to. There's one for wooden objects, one for cities, one for deities. The determinative on this Namtag is the one reserved exclusively for animate beings, animals, humans, gods. The scribe filed the threat under living thing. Al-Hashimi reads this as the scribe's best attempt to describe something that moved and made sound, but had no familiar category. The Munich colleague, the one who went silent for 6 weeks, has reportedly argued the determinative was scribal error, citing 2 parallel tablets from Girsu where the same sign appears misplaced. Pennsylvania disagrees, noting those Girsu examples are 400 years later and from a different scribal school, so the disagreement is real, and it's narrow, and it matters. One sign decides whether the text is myth or report. Marco de Gregorio had been cleaning salt-encrusted tablets for 19 years when he lifted the crust off the Lagash obverse. He told colleagues later he photographed it before reading 3 lines because the column layout looked wrong for an administrative text. Administrative tablets are gridded. This one flowed. He sent the photographs to Ali al-Hashimi the same evening. Al-Hashimi worked through the transliteration for 3 days. Then he called the team lead outside Baghdad and said something the lead wrote down verbatim. The tablet is not describing a destruction, it is describing a departure. That's the moment the project changed shape. A grain receipt became a witness statement. De Gregorio kept conserving. Al-Hashimi kept translating. The reverse side, column 3, the part describing what happened after the doors were sealed, took another 2 weeks to clean because salt had penetrated deeper on that face. What came out of those 2 weeks is what made 3 of the 4 readers stop talking publicly. Before we open the reverse side, the part 4 scholars argue about and none will publish, subscribe and hit the bell, drop 1 word in the comments. The supply you would have stockpiled first. The second half is where skeptics start to flinch. Have you ever tried to describe a color you'd never seen before? That's the linguistic problem the watchers had when they looked through the ventilation shafts on day 4. The shafts were narrow stone channels angled to the surface, wide enough to admit air and a sliver of sky, too narrow for anything to climb down. For the first 3 days after sealing, the watchers reported the great wailing roar sweeping the region in passes, fading and returning, fading and returning. Livestock left on the surface died simultaneously. Guninda Bausch, they fell as one. On day 4, the roar stopped, and the watchers refused to recommend opening the doors. They saw something through the shafts the scribe captured in 2 Sumerian morphemes welded together. Dalakur, brightness combined with wrongness, not darkness, not eclipse. The light itself had changed quality, and whatever had changed it was still up there in a form they had no word for. The watchers said wait. The population waited 3 months. Picture 7 men climbing a narrow stone shaft at the end of those 3 months. The text calls them Lu Igi Zu, the knowing-eyed men, a designation used in other tablets for trained scouts. 7 is specific. The scribe counted them by name, and we have 6 of the 7 names in legible cuneiform. What they found on the surface broke the scribe's register. He'd been recording phases and quantities like a quartermaster. Now he writes in the rhythm of a lamentation poem. The fields were ash, but not burned ash. The word is sahar dala, dust that shines, a fine luminous residue coating every surface. The Tigris ran the color of copper, trees stripped bare, no birds, no insects. The silence was the loudest thing they reported. 3 of the 7 became sick within hours. Skin burns where it was exposed, vomiting, confusion. The 4 healthy carried the 3 back underground and sealed the door. 2 died in days. The 3rd survived and lost his vision. Here's the claim, stated cleanly so you can stress test it. The clinical sequence the scribe recorded: erythema within hours, vomiting, rapid systemic failure, death in days, blindness in 1 survivor, matches the modern textbook progression for acute radiation syndrome at exposures between 4 and 8 gray. That's not a loose match. That's the specific dose window and the specific symptom order taught in every radiation medicine curriculum since 1950. The luminous dust coating every surface corresponds to fallout particulate. The altered light corresponds to atmospheric ionization. The copper-colored river corresponds to oxidation of iron-bearing sediment under intense radiation flux. Here's the detail that doesn't fit. The population came back out 3 generations later, and the land was farmable again. Modern fallout zones at lethal exposure levels don't return to agricultural use in 60 years. They take centuries to millennia, depending on isotope half-lives. So either the scribe got the timeline wrong, or whatever produced the residue had a decay profile we don't currently model. Both options are uncomfortable. Compare the Lagash tablet to the Eridu Genesis, the Sumerian flood narrative most scholars treat as the prototype catastrophe text. Eridu Genesis is mythological in register from line 1, gods convene, gods quarrel, gods send the flood. It names supernatural agents and divine motives. The Lagash tablet does neither. No gods are convened. No motive is assigned. The threat is described by what it did, not by who sent it. The scribe records phases, quantities, names, symptoms, the same vocabulary used in grain ledgers from the same dig season. 2 other parallels nobody is publishing about. A fragment from Shurupak references the time we were below in a king list preamble, and a lament for passage uses Sahar Dala. In a context translators have always read metaphorically. If the Lagash tablet is literal, those passages stop being metaphors. That's the real reason Munich went quiet for 6 weeks. Accepting one tablet as literal forces a rereading of the entire 3rd millennium corpus. Here's why nobody has published. In June 2022, 4 months after al-Hashimi finished his transliteration, the Iraqi State Board of Antiquities reclassified the Lagash tablet under Restricted Access Category 2, the security tier reserved for objects like the Warka Vas. A tablet from an unclassified crate sitting in a flooded basement for half a century was suddenly national heritage, requiring ministerial approval for further study. Al-Hashimi was asked to delete his photographs. The Journal of Near Eastern Studies returned his paper without review. Pennsylvania still wants joint publication. SOAS wants the tablet physically re-examined first. Munich hasn't sent a substantive email in 3 years. The silence is now the loudest evidence in the file. Pull up the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature and search the word Dala across every text. Decide for yourself how many metaphors stay metaphors. The tablet isn't the mystery. The blueprint is 17 doors, a year of grain, a population that knew which entrance was theirs. That's a maintained defense against something the builders expected back. Next investigation, Derinkuyu. 18 levels carved beneath Cappadocia, builder unknown, dating contested, same pattern, 1,500 kilometers away. The doors keep showing up.